Welcome back. We finally created some data that our boss can finally use. The difference between wage and value of a soccer player. But this is kind of hard to read. Wouldn't it be nice if we can visualize this data? And that is a big thing that a data scientist does. It analyzes the data, understands the data, cleans the data. But at the end of the day, if you want to present this to anybody, you need it in a format that is easily understandable for somebody that might not be a data science expert. So let's visualize this. Now, we talked about matplotlib, which is what is often used to visualize this data. Now, this library is very extensive, and you can read the documentation on your own. But a ton of other libraries have been built on top of it to simplify and make it easier for us to visualize data. One of these libraries is called Seaborn, and is really, really easy to use. Let me show you. So we have this data. If we go to a new cell block, and just a reminder here, the way Jupyter Notebooks works is that it has to run all these inputs. If you refresh Jupyter Notebooks and you have a notebook and just click on run for one cell, it won't have the previous cells in memory. So you have to make sure that all these cells are run in order for you to execute this part. Because if you just restarted Jupyter Notebooks, it won't have any of this in memory. But anyway, just wanted to make that note in case you have an error. Let's use Seaborn to visualize the data we have above. So again, Seaborn, you can just read the documentation, and there's tons of tutorials online that you can follow. But I'll just show you the easy way of doing it. So we're going to import Seaborn. We're going to set up Seaborn by just running set. And now we can just create a variable, graph, and call SNS, or sorry, I should do Seaborn as SNS, just so we don't have to write Seaborn every time. So SNS.set. And then we're going to say graph equals SNS, and we're going to use the scatter plot as the graphing method that we want to use. And on the x-axis, we're going to use the wage. And on the y-axis, we're going to use the value. And the data we're going to use for the graph is going to be data frame 1, which is what we have up here. So if I run this, all right, we should have the graph now. So let's actually print it out. If I click run, look at that. How easy was that? Seaborn was imported for me, and all I had to do is say what graph I wanted, what were the values, so that is the x-axis and the y-axis, and what data we want to use, and all of a sudden I have a graph. How cool is that? Just like that, using some really nice Python libraries, I now have a notebook that shows my progress of exploring this data. But we have one problem here. You see, I have all these scattered dots, but I don't really know what they mean. Wouldn't it be cool if there's a way for us to hover and actually see which player represents the dot? Well, we can do that with another library. And this one is called Bokeh. It's a hard one to say. Bokeh, whatever you want to call it, is another library that allows us to actually have interactive visualizations. So again, if I go back, I can use it in a similar fashion that I did with Seaborn. I simply say from Bokeh, this is going to be really hard to say, and I'm going to say dot plotting. So from the plotting library, I'm going to import the figure and show functions. And then also from the bokeh.models, I'm going to import the hover tool, which is going to allow us to hover over these things. Again, you don't have to memorize these. If you go to the documentation and look at the quick start, you'll actually see this, or you can even Google for it. So if we actually go to the quick start guide, you see that we have the two libraries that we imported, plotting and models, and it shows you how to get started quickly. As a matter of fact, we can just copy and paste this line, which allows us to plot title and x-axis. So let's do that. And I'm going to give the title as Soccer 2019. The x-axis label will be wage, and the y-axis label will be value. And in here, I can give it different parameters that perhaps I want. For example, I can say plot width for how many pixels I want my plot width to be. And same with plot height. We'll say we want that to be also 700 pixels. And then finally, I can say what type of tools I want to use. In our case, we're going to create a hover tool so that we can hover over this figure. So this will be our graph right now. Next, if I do p.show, or actually the way it would work is we do the show that we import from here, and we run it like this. And you know what, for now, let's not use any of the hover tools. If I click run here, looks like I have a bit of a mistake here. I deleted show by mistake. Let's click run. And look at that. It actually opens up a new HTML file for me so that this could be interactive. But right now it's empty. We actually have to draw the circles of our plot. But we have wage and value. And the title, Soccer 2019. If we go to the quick start, we see that we can do lines, and we can do circles as well with different type of options. And because we're doing a scatter plot, let's do exactly that. I'll go back, and in here, say that I want the circles that we're going to create. And again, don't get too confused if this is new to you. Again, this is all just a library and the documentation that you have to read if you want to get familiar with it. So we'll have the circles, wage and value. So that is the x-axis and the y-axis values of the circles. And then we'll say size. We can give it a size of, let's say, 10 for now. And the source of the data will be from df1. So that's what we want the circles to contain. If I now run this, I may have spelled something wrong. This should be size. If I click run, look at that. I have my data points, which is great, which is what we had before. We have a new HTML file that's generated, but I want to be able to hover. So if I go to, let's close this for now. If I go to the quick start guide and let's just search for hover, we see that we have the hover tool. And we have all these options that we can use for hovering again. Oh, I like this one. But I'll just show you the basic syntax. Essentially, what we want to do is we use the hover to equal the hover tool that we're importing. And in here, we can say that the tool tips is going to equal a list that contains some tuples. So it looks like we can use the tooltip like this. So let me just copy this. So we have the tooltips, we have the index, and then the X and Y axis. In our case, it's wage and value. And we'll change this to wage and value. And we don't care about the ordering, but we actually want to add another field, which is the name of the player from the data. So as you can see, in the hover tooltips section, or for basic tooltips, it'll show you exactly what each value represents and how you can represent it. And you have the dollar signs and the @ signs. So in our case, we want to individually have the wage and the value displayed here. So we're going to use the @ sign. Unlike the X and Y dollar sign, which just simply gives us the X and Y value. So I'm just going to change this to the @ sign, and then finally also have the name property as well. Now the final thing we need to do is to just give this tooltips as the tools inside of this figure parameter. If I now run this, it looks like another error. Let's see. So it should be hover tool here. And give it the array that we want. So that if I run, hey, look at that. We have an interactive plot that we can actually analyze. So we see here that Neymar has a pretty low wage compared to his value. What about Messi here? Well, Messi is definitely getting paid a lot compared to his value. So you might find some good deals for trades, maybe with Mbappe. Very, very cool. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. When it comes to visualization libraries like this, there's a lot of trial and error and learning how the library works, how to visualize this properly. And up until now, all we've done is this part, right? We've imported the data and then cleaned the data and maybe have done some visualizations with it. We haven't really done any of these parts yet. Up until now, what we've been doing is mostly data science, trying to grab data and understand it for business purposes. I want you to explore this data set a little bit more, maybe try out some of these data visualization libraries. But for now, I think we have enough to move on and get into some more machine learning concepts. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.